All right, I know we still have people logging in, but while they do, I'm going to take a moment to thank everyone for being here and introduce myself. My name is Lindsay Henning, and I'm the Donor Relations Manager for the Canada Program of the Nature Conservancy and our Canadian affiliate, Nature United. I absolutely love seeing so many familiar faces today and a lot of new faces from across our borders. Today, we'll hear from Claire Hutton, our Indigenous Stewardship Director, and Zara Ramtula, our On the Land Program Coordinator, as we explore what it means to work with Canada's emerging leaders. This is our first virtual field trip using Zoom, so please forgive us in advance for any technology issues. Our goal is to have a smooth presentation for you. Also, we'll be recording this call so that we can share it out later. And throughout the presentation, if you wouldn't mind staying muted, you can type in any questions or comments using the chat feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to answer them during the Q&A towards the second half of our call. I'd also like to invite you to use your earphones or earbuds, not required, but they might improve the sound quality. And then lastly, I promise this is my last sound bite, but before I begin, I'm gonna take a moment to acknowledge that I'm calling in from Naples, Florida, which is the ancestral lands of the Seminole, Miccosukee, and Calusa people. Without further ado, I'm gonna hand the presentation over to Claire.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Claire Hutton, and I am calling in today from Victoria, BC, on the west coast of Canada. I said good morning, but good afternoon to those of you who are in different time zones. And I live on the territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples of the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich nations. And so what I am going to do today, thank you again for joining us, is I'm going to give a bit of context about our work to support Indigenous-led conservation in Canada before Zara jumps into the great stories and details about our work to support emerging leaders. And so just on a personal note, I've been working in this space both for nonprofit organizations and for Indigenous organizations around supporting Indigenous-led conservation and Indigenous approaches to resource management. And I feel really proud right now to be working for Nature United, because I think the work that we're doing in this space is really evolving and growing in response to what we're learning from the Indigenous peoples that we work with. And our efforts to be a respectful partner and a good ally are always important, but feel particularly important with a lot of what we're seeing going on in the world right now. So I just feel good about the work that we do here and the questions that we're asking and how we're operating as a conservation organization. So excited to share a bit more about that. So as you mostly likely are aware, Nature United is the Canadian affiliate of the global conservation organization, the Nature Conservancy. And in Canada, we have two main pillars to our 5-year strategic plan. So one of those pillars is focused on climate, largely around natural climate solutions, which we're happy to talk about another time. But today we're really going to focus on the second pillar, which is around supporting Indigenous-led conservation. And the emerging leaders work that Zara is going to talk about is a really critical and foundational part to this support for Indigenous-led conservation. And as you'll see on this map here, as a Canadian conservation organization, we kind of work in two ways. We have place-based work that's in direct partnership with Indigenous communities in British Columbia, in Manitoba, and in Northwest Territories. And in addition to that, we also work across geographies at broader scales to support this work around partnerships to support Indigenous-led conservation. So Heather, if you can move on to the next slide, that would be great. So yeah, at Nature United, we hold the belief that working in partnership to support Indigenous-led conservation is really critical to achieving durable outcomes for conservation, also durable outcomes for the sustainable use of resources, and equally important, durable outcomes for human well-being. So all of those three pieces. And as it says on this slide here, it's kind of based on a belief that place-based Indigenous communities who have strong connections to their territories really are the folks that are best positioned to make decisions that will ensure sustainable use and stewardship of lands and waters over time. And so as a conservation organization, working both in Canada and also working globally, we feel that we both have a responsibility as well as an amazing opportunity to support this type of work and be in partnership around this type of work. So if you could hop on to the next slide, Heather. Thank you. So yeah, at Nature United, we've actually spent quite a lot of time thinking through and working to articulate why we feel like this is important to focus both a lot of our organizational capacity as well as resources on supporting Indigenous-led conservation. And as I'm sure all of you can appreciate, that any really good question often doesn't have one answer. So as this is a good question, it does not have one answer. And I only have 5 minutes, which I'm probably pushing the edges of already. So I'm just gonna focus on a few of these. But yeah, our thinking around this is multifaceted. We can share with you afterwards a link to a page on our website around Nature United's approach to working in partnership with Indigenous peoples, which provides a lot more context as well as a lot more kind of details on the different boxes that you see on this diagram. But for sake of time, brevity, I'm just going to touch on a few of them here. So the first one, Indigenous people are the original stewards of the lands and waters that we now refer to as Canada. So this, won't come as a surprise to people, but when European people arrived in Canada at the advent of colonization, Indigenous peoples had fully functioning and complex governance systems and strategies to manage and sustainably use resources. And so as the original stewards of the lands that we now live on, Indigenous peoples have the knowledge, the experience, the practices, and the beliefs that have really been accumulated over millennia. And it's our, again, a kind of a responsibility, and the opportunity is there for us to listen and to learn from and support Indigenous peoples if we're to collectively solve the conservation challenges that we currently face locally and globally. So the next one is around Canadian laws and commitments. So in Canada, the involvement of Indigenous peoples in the management of lands and waters is recognized and explicitly mandated in both international and Canadian laws and commitments. So first, through Section 35 of Canada's Constitution, that protects Aboriginal rights, so kind of embedded in the highest law of the land from a Crown perspective, from a Canadian government perspective, Aboriginal rights are protected. There's also a really significant body of Canadian case law that describes the necessary involvement of Indigenous peoples as it relates to lands and waters. And then another example is international agreements that Canada is signatory to, such as the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which is sometimes called UNDRIP. So from our perspective, we both have a moral and a legal imperative to be supporting Indigenous-led conservation. And the last one I'll talk about just quickly is scientific evidence. So if you're familiar with the Nature Conservancy, we're a science-based organization, and so we like to pull in the scientific evidence, and the literature, the academic literature supports that local and place-based peoples, so in this context, Indigenous peoples in Canada, both can and do manage resources more sustainably than other actors, particularly if they have the ability to make and monitor and enforce the rules related to resource management. So again, we have a lot more information on that, happy to share afterwards, but there's some of the reasons why we think that it's important to support Indigenous-led conservation. So just in closing, before I hand it over to Zara, if you could slip to the next slide there, Heather. What I wanted to do is quickly provide a snapshot of the overall framework of our approach and the areas of work that we focus on based on the priorities of the Indigenous partners that we work with, and where the emerging leaders work that Zara is going to talk about fits in. So as I've mentioned before, Nature United supports Indigenous people's authority to manage and steward lands and waters by working in partnership. And this work really falls into 4 buckets. So you can see those buckets in blue and light blue on this slide. And while those are represented as kind of discrete and separate from each other in this illustration, in real life, we know these things are deeply interwoven and interconnected and really don't exist without the other in many ways. But that first bucket there around strengthening governance is really focused on Indigenous peoples having systems of governance in place that reflect their own values and their own worldviews, and the capacity and resources to build strong laws and plans and policies as it relates to lands and waters. The second bucket around enhancing stewardship capacity is focused on Indigenous peoples having the capacity and resources and skills really to kind of be the boots on the ground and to implement the plans and policies that have been developed through their nation's governance structures. The third bucket is around building and sustaining leadership. And this really focuses on the importance of having strong leaders throughout the demographic of a community. And so Zara is going to dive into our work that supports young people, emerging leaders, and we also have bodies of work that are around supporting existing Indigenous stewardship leaders, focused both on peer support, strategic partnerships, as well as personal wellness. And last but not least, we have a bucket that's focused on supporting local sustainable economies, because we know that this is critical. We hear that from our partners, and that people need meaningful work in sustainable economies to stay in the places where they are from, to take care of the lands and waters in their territories. So as I mentioned before, Nature United does put a lot of effort into being a respectful partner, but of a lot of attention and intention into this part of our work. And then overall, we believe by focusing on all of these things, that the outcomes will be durable and lasting solutions for both people and nature. So I hope that provides a bit of context for Zara, in which Zara's work is situated. And so thanks for your attention. And I will hand it over to Zara. And happy to answer questions as well at the end of the presentation.
Awesome, thanks Claire. Hi everyone, thanks for joining. My name is Zara Rantula and I'm the On the Land Programs Coordinator with Nature United. And I'm based here in Vancouver, British Columbia, also on the west coast of Canada, and really grateful to have been living on the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations for a number of years. And so, yeah, I'm going to share a little bit about our Emerging Leaders programs. So those are our youth programs on the land, on the water, learning programs. And I think they're, well, I'm biased, but I think this is the most exciting work that we do. And it's really a pleasure to be able to work in this area. I've been working for Nature United for almost 2 years now. And I'm new to conservation. I come from a K-12 teaching background and a public health background. And it's just really cool to see these amazing programs, because when I was in the classroom, this is the type of thing that I would have loved to be able to connect my students to. And I just found it so hard in the public school system. So it's really neat to be able to see the communities that we work with doing these really amazing things, and to be able to be a part of supporting that. So Heather, if you switch to the next slide. So I just want to provide a bit of context about why these programs are so important. And Claire's described a little bit about how this work fits with building Indigenous leadership and building community leadership. But these programs really reconnect youth to their traditional territories and to their cultures and to their communities and to themselves. And as Claire mentioned, you know, Indigenous communities had fully functioning governments and thriving communities prior to colonization, and youth and elders and older generations were spending time out on the land together, and that was the way that teachings were passed down through generations, and that intergenerational transfer of knowledge was happening that would give youth the knowledge and skills that they needed to be safe out on the land and to be able to steward their territories, their lands, and their waters. And colonization disrupted those connections and broke connections between families, and also in terms of that knowledge transfer. And so these programs are so important because they help to revitalize those connections that were broken. And you know, youth are growing up in these amazing places. Like you can see this picture here. This is Klemtu, British Columbia, which is on the central coast of BC. And youth are growing up in this wonderful natural environment, but without a program like SEAS, which is the program that the picture is from here that I'll talk about more in a second, not everyone would be able to get out and explore their territory. Some people would be kind of confined to their reserve, to their small village, because to get out on the land and the water, you need money for things like boats and fuel, and you need skills and knowledge to be safe on the land. And so, you know, through colonization, some of that knowledge and those skills were not able to be passed down, and there was also economic impacts from resource extraction and things like overfishing, and so that contributed to economic decline in a lot of communities, which forced families to do things like sell boats that they would have been able to use to get out and access their territory. And so so these programs kind of provide that equity of access. You know, this SEAS program is through the school in Klemtu, and so all students that are attending that school have the opportunity to get out. Whereas without that program, it would only be select families that still have access to boats and to that knowledge through the elders in their families. And so, you know, that reconnection that these programs provide to territory and culture also helps youth to feel proud of who they are and where they come from, and reconnects them to themselves and to their identity. So these programs are just so important. I think you can overstate how important these programs are for youth growing up kind of happy and healthy and contributing to their community wellness in that sense, as well as to stewardship outcomes in terms of having that knowledge and those skills to take care of their lands and waters. So if you can go to the next slide, Heather. So I'll just provide a little context about how we got involved in this work. So we started working in emerging leaders programs in 2009, and that was on the central coast of BC. And so this is a picture of Heiltsuk Nation territory close to Bella Bella, British Columbia, Quay, which is a camp just about 2 hours away from the community. And so Nature United had been invited to support a conservation effort in the Great Bear Rainforest, where government and Indigenous communities were coming together to protect this amazing land. And we kept hearing over and over from our community partners that if you really want to invest in conservation in this area and you really want to support our communities, you need to support our youth. And so from that, we became involved in a program model called SEAS, which stands for Supporting Emerging Aboriginal Stewards. And we began partnering with the Heiltsuk Nation and then later on with the Kitasoo-Hayhais Nation in Klemtu, which is the picture from the previous slide, and also the Newhalk Nation in Bella Coola, BC. And so if you switch to the next slide, Heather, I'll just tell you a little bit about the SEAS program model. And so those three communities that I mentioned, Bella Bella, Klemtu, and Bella Coola, all have a SEAS program that shares some similar characteristics, but then there's also some nuances between them because the programs that we support are all adapted to fit the specific community context where they're located. And so that model is flexible so that the community can make it work for their own specific needs. But all the SEAS programs share certain elements. So they all have a school-based program and a summer internship program. And I'll talk about the summer internship program in a little bit. But in the school program, each community has a SEAS coordinator that's based in the school. And that coordinator links community to the school and also gets students out on the land and the water. And so in Bella Bella, which is where this picture is from, Johanna is the SEAS coordinator there. And she facilitates field trip opportunities for students to get out and go harvesting and learn about the different places in their territory and participate in camping trips. They also have an outdoors club where high school students can go on extended camping trips to learn about the different culturally significant places in their territory. And she also facilitates connections where community members can come into the school and share their knowledge with the youth in that school. And so this is a picture from an outdoor learning experience that the students were doing with Elroy White, who's an archaeologist in the community. And I just really like this quote here. So at the end of the school year, students fill out surveys where they say what they liked from the year, what they would like to see done differently, and kind of what impact that the program had on them that year. And one student shared, Elroy was the person who inspired me. And after that one field trip, I've wanted to become an archaeologist. So it's really neat to see kind of how those connections can spark something in the youth. And so if you go to the next slide, Heather. So I want to share about another SEAS program, and this is the SEAS program in Klemtu, BC. And so that program looks slightly different from the Bella Bella program. So the SEAS coordinator in Klemtu's name is Deanna. And Deanna normally has a SEAS block within the regular school system or regular school schedule where students would rotate around to her class, and she would spend an hour multiple times a week teaching them about language, teaching them about culture, teaching them about different protocols and practices that are important to their community. And she also organizes full-day field trips for the whole school to get out and do things like harvest seaweed, go clam digging, and learn about different places in their territory. And so this picture is actually from an exchange that took place where students from Bella Bella Community School traveled down to Klemtu to learn about Kitasoo-Hayhais territory with the students from the school in Klemtu, which is called Kitasoo Community School. And so this exchange happened right before COVID happened. So it was really lucky that that was still able to occur before travel was restricted. But This is a picture of the group together in Kitasoo Bay where they were learning about the herring roe harvest and learning about the significance of the bay and how conservation efforts have looked in the bay. And so I wanted to highlight the exchanges as well, because I think the exchanges are another really important part of the SEAS program. Usually each year there's an exchange where one community will travel to another community. This year I was working with the SEAS coordinators to plan three-way exchanges where they would have traveled to Klemtu and then traveled to Bella Bella later on in May and then to Bella Coola. But we're going to have to kind of think a little bit about how that might work and when, with everything going on with COVID. But these exchanges are so important because, you know, Klemtu and Bella Bella are not physically that far away from each other. They're about 30 miles apart, but to get from one to the other, you have to cross, you know, a body of open water where weather builds up and travel can be tricky. And these kids might not have had that chance to meet each other without an opportunity like this exchange facilitated through the SEAS program. And they're likely going to be working together when they grow up. There's, you know, regional stewardship forums or regional stewardship groups that they might be part of where they're together. There's regional economic development tables and that kind of thing. And so them being able to meet each other as youth and build those relationships and kind of learn about who each other are and understand a little bit about each other's cultures is so important for them being able to work together well as adults when they're going to have to be making important decisions together. And there's also several family ties between the communities, and it's, you know, the youth might not have known that they were related to people in one of the communities if they come from the other community. And so on this particular exchange, I was talking to Johanna and Deanna, the two SEAS coordinators in these communities, after the exchange happened. And Johanna was describing to me how when they went down to Klemtu, they participated in a community potluck dinner where the students from Bella Bella stood up and introduced themselves to the community using cultural protocol. So they talked about who their parents are, where they come from. And after they did that, people from the community in Klemtu came up to them and said, you know, I'm actually your auntie. I'm related to your mom in this way, or I'm related to your grandpa in this way. And so without having that opportunity to visit Klemtu, some of those students from Bella Bella would have never met those relatives. And I think that's just such a special thing for them to experience. So Heather, if you switch to the next slide. Thanks. So I just want to share a bit about how SEAS is looking a little bit different right now with everything happening with COVID. And as things start to open up a little bit, things are continuing to shift. And so I was just talking to Johanna, the SEAS coordinator in Bella Bella yesterday, who was telling me that she's actually been able to go out on the land in a physically distanced way with one or two students at a time. So it's great to hear that people are starting to be able to get out onto the land again with the students. But right at the beginning of the pandemic, Deanna shifted really quickly. I was really amazed by how quickly these programs were able to pivot. And so Deanna started making videos where she was able to continue sharing this knowledge around territory and culture and the different practices that the community engages in and values. And so she started to make videos that she posted on Facebook and would have liaised with, you know, the appropriate people in the community to make sure that she had permission to post this video, and then there would be certain things that she wouldn't be able to share publicly. But this one she was able to share, so she started with making a video on how to harvest and prepare poison root medicine. And I just thought it was really cool to see, you know, there's 26 people that shared that video throughout the community and throughout the school community. So even with COVID happening, people are still finding ways to pass on that knowledge. Which I think is really important. If you go to the next slide, please, Heather. So I also wanted to talk about the SEAS summer internships a little bit. So that's the other component of the Supporting Emerging Aboriginal Stewards program. And the internships are really a chance for a smaller group of youth, so it's usually 4 to 6 high school students, to kind of engage in deeper learning about culture and territory. And so this picture is from the New Hulk Summer Internship Program in Bella Coola, BC. And I was really lucky last summer to be able to spend a few days with the interns and with the internship coordinator, Nadia, who's down there in the red at the bottom of the photo. And so I got to hang out with them while they were building fences in the local rivers. And they were working with the fish hatchery to trap the fish in those fences so that the fish hatchery workers could do an egg and sperm take to enhance the returns, the salmon returns, kind of through that mechanism. And so they learned about the rivers, they learned about how to build the fences, they learned about why it was important, they learned about the fish. And it was really cool to see them kind of opening up to different career pathways that they might not have considered before. And Nadia is a huge advocate for land-based learning. She's also an education assistant in the school, in the band school, the Exaltsa school in Bella Coola, which also has a SEAS program. And so she talks about how she became a tourist in her own territory at the age of 20 through SEAS, and how, you know, there's some youth in the community who don't know about this amazing kind of nature that's in their backyard, and who might be on their phones saying there's nothing to do here. So she's really excited to be in the position that she's in, to be able to kind of introduce youth to what's right in front of them, and open their eyes to the different possibilities that they can access for their own futures. And so I just wanted to share a couple of quotes from the surveys that the interns, because the interns also fill out surveys at the end of their experience to provide feedback on the program. And so one person said at the end of the summer, last summer, said, when we worked with the Coastal Guardian watchmen and the fish hatchery workers, this introduced me to a whole new interest in what I want to go to college for. And another person said, the SEAS internship really opened me to jobs that I didn't think I'd see myself doing. So it's pretty cool to see youth kind of looking at these different stewardship pathways and seeing these different possibilities for their future that they might not have if they hadn't had this experience. So Heather, if you go to the next slide. So I just want to share about one more program model that we started working with kind of early on in our emerging leaders work, and that's the Nahatni Dene Ranger program with the Lutzelk'e Dene First Nation in the north of Canada, in the Northwest Territories. And so Nature United was invited in 2007 to support Lutzelk'e Dene First Nation with their vision for Thai-Dene-Nene, which is their traditional homeland. And so youth were always a key part of their vision for this area and for the stewardship of this area. And they've talked about how the land has nurtured and inspired countless generations whose prosperity continues to be ensured by a deep intimacy between the people and the land. And they talk about how for the well-being of future generations, this way of life needs to be passed on, exercised, and nurtured. And so they see youth engagement as a key part of this. And so in August 2019, Thai-Dene-Nene was designated as an Indigenous protected area. And so this is a 6.5 million acre protected area that was established between agreements that were signed between the Lutzelk'e Dene First Nation and the government of the Northwest Territories, and then also another agreement that was signed between the Lutzelk'e Dene First Nation and the government of Canada. And so now these three parties are responsible for co-management of this giant protected area. And there's also a trust fund associated with that responsibility. It's called the Thai-Dene-Nene Trust Fund, and that's a $30 million fund. So it was $15 million raised by the Lutzelk'e Dene First Nation, and Nature United had a really large role in supporting them to raise that money. And then the other 15 million was matched by the government of Canada. And so now it's a pretty landmark kind of event, I suppose, where Lutzelk'e Dene First Nation is responsible along with Canada and the Northwest Territories for stewarding this area. And it really is an example of an Indigenous community asserting their rights and authority to manage their own territory. But so back to the emerging leaders or the youth part, the Thai-Dene-Nene program is kind of the practical operationalization of the stewardship responsibility. And so every summer, there's rangers that are out on the land, and youth go out on the land with these rangers. So each crew is usually made up of 2 senior rangers, and then there's 2 to 3 youth from the community that are hired as junior rangers or interns for the summer. And they are out monitoring the territory on the water, monitoring kind of the ecological changes in the territory, monitoring important cultural sites and that kind of thing, interacting with visitors. And so the youth, by being out with the senior rangers, are learning about the land and the water. And it's really interesting with this program, there's no set or written up curriculum, because the Dene way is to learn by doing, and that's what happens. So the youth learn how to navigate, they learn about the weather, they learn about their culture, about their community, about the places in their territory, the stories that go with those different places, the names of those places in their Indigenous language. And it all happens organically by being in that place with those senior rangers and having that opportunity for that intergenerational transfer of knowledge. And a lot of those youth actually go on then to become senior rangers. Some become boat captains, some go and work on the land for the mines or for Parks Canada. And somebody's actually returned home to Lutzelk'e Dene First Nation to work as a resource officer for the government of the Northwest Territories. So this program not only facilitates those stewardship pathways and job opportunities for youth, but it also helps to build the community stewardship capacity to manage their territory. So Heather, if you'll switch to the next slide, please. So those are kind of the first 4 programs that we were involved with when we started working in this realm of emerging leaders or youth. And since then, we've broadened the work that we do because we've started partnering with other communities and learned that, you know, the SEAS model is a really awesome model, but there's other models that make sense in other communities. And so we're flexible, I guess, with our support to be able to meet a community where they're at and do what makes sense for them. So I want to share about the House It Warriors program, which is a program that we started working with about a year ago, actually. And so a House It First Nation is located off the west coast of Vancouver Island, so even further west of where I am, in Clayoquot Sound. And the Warriors program is an after-school program, so it's a bit of a different model. And it's a program for young men and for boys to build leadership skills and to learn about brotherhood and to learn about respect and to learn land-based skills, and is really important kind of to the community's vision for raising strong and healthy boys to address some of the systemic issues that, you know, have resulted from colonization. And so I just want to share a video. We'll just watch the first little bit of the video, but I think it really describes the Warriors program well and why it's so important.
We're up in the Meejan River watershed, and it's an untouched watershed. It's majestic, it's beautiful, it's spiritual, and we're here today on our monthly camp with our House It Warriors.
I really like Warriors. It's a really fun thing. We're up to doing some hard work. We're gonna make a cabin, make trails, cutting wood, keeping a fire going, set up our tents. We're learning to live in the wild. We've been at 5 or 4 camp trips. Yeah.
It was in September we started the House It Warriors, and it was through Ricardo. With my job, I went over to Itatsu and I got asked to go to their program, and I was just so impressed, with what I had seen from these young adults. And I said to Ricardo, how long did it take you to do this? He says, over a couple of years. I said, I want to do this in House It.
At first I thought it was just a day thing, just one day thing. And then I read it more, and then I said, oh, I can't think, so I start going to this. Yeah.
The person that told me about it was saying that she looked at me as like a leader, and so I took that chance to, try to prove myself as a leader. I never had that before when I was a kid, so, just to show them that it's to have a lot of fun. That's all it's about.
It's really important for them to get out there physically, to actually touch, to actually take your shoes off and take your socks off and feel the land, feel what's been there for thousands of years and our ancestors walking.
I think it's fantastic. I'm surprised and excited at the uptake in the community. So at first I was thinking, well, we'll get 6 to 10 kids, and sometimes they have upwards of 20. So it's pretty exciting.
So I probably have 5 or 6 grade 5s who go, and they pretty much run out of my classroom to go, are very excited about it. And within the first weeks of it starting, I started seeing more confidence, excitement, and just talking about it a lot. It was pretty immediate, the benefits for them in the classroom. So that was really exciting.
We do it every Tuesday. We have our meetings. I've been doing it for almost every time to learn about brotherhood. Because they might need help and they might not ask for it, and then you could just do it.
I've never been like someone who can lead people in my life. So when I heard about this leadership thing, might as well just like give it a shot, see what it's like.
But it's so cool to have.
Awesome. Thanks for playing that, Heather. I love that quote from Aaron at the end where he talks about how he never saw himself as a leader, but through this program, he's has been able to find a different part of himself that maybe he didn't know was there. And I see a little question popping up in the chat, and I know we'll have time for questions later about whether there's a similar program for girls. And there is a Girls Warriors program in a house and it's got some links to the school. And the boys program is also likely going to be more tightly linked to the school next year, so there may be some opportunities to integrate those two programs in the future. And I can also touch later maybe in the question time on kind of different ways that we're supporting women as well as young men. So Heather, if you switch to the next slide there. I'm probably out of time. I think I've gone a bit longer than I was supposed to, but I just want to quickly kind of show you guys the different ways that Nature United contributes to the really amazing programs that you've just seen a little bit about. So these different bubbles are kind of the different ways that we provide support, from sharing tools and resources. Like we've got an awesome SEAS toolkit that is publicly available for anybody who's looking to start up a land-based program for Indigenous youth or to strengthen one that already exists. You know, we provide funding and grants for some of these programs. And I just want to highlight the facilitation support and networking and exchange support on the next slide. And then just really quickly before we go there, share that bottom right-hand bubble about sharing the story of these programs to generate more support for this work. One really neat example of that was there was a conference on Indigenous education in Vancouver last November. And so Deanna, the coordinator from the SEAS program in Clemtu, came down to Vancouver to present at that conference with me, as did a teacher from the school. But the most awesome part of that was that her daughter, Roberta, came down as well and was a key part of the presentation, and all the feedback that we got after that conference presentation was that Roberta was the star of the show and people just loved hearing from her. So I just wanted to share that example. And she's also been helping Deanna make the videos that you saw with the poison root medicine one on the other slide. And so it's just really cool to see, you know, one youth who's been in the school program and has also been a SEAS summer intern going off and doing all these amazing things and sharing her knowledge. So if you go to the next slide, Heather, I'll just quickly, before I'm totally out of time, share. So this is from an accelerator event that Nature United hosted in Vancouver also last year. And this was where the House It Warriors program, you might recognize Tom Paul, who's the coordinator of the program. He's there in the kind of light blue shirt. He invited a group of people to come and help him think about the vision for the Warriors program and how to implement that vision. And so one of the people he invited was Johanna, who's the SEAS coordinator in Bella Bella, to come and share her knowledge. She's there in the checkered shirt right at the front of the photos. And so this picture is from a Lego exercise that they were doing to think about what their vision for the program was. And it was also really neat that there was some youth that were able to attend and contribute to the conversation. And so Evan, who's there in the black shirt, is from a Warriors program that exists in another nation, in Ucluelet First Nation. And so he was able to contribute his perspective from the program he's involved in. And then Matthew and Blake, who are on the left, kind of at the back of the photo, are in the House It Warriors program, and were able to share what they want to see in the program. So that was a really special experience to be part of. And if you go to the next slide, Heather. Thanks. I just wanted to share this photo too. This is from the last day of the Accelerator event in Vancouver, and the youth were recognized with certificates and some Nature United swag to thank them for their contributions to the discussion. And it was really cool to see them so proud of being there and being part of that. And just before we took that photo, it was also really neat because at the beginning, we talked about where the Warriors program was at. This was 2 days before this photo on the first day of the Accelerator. And the first thing that Tom and others said was, you know, we're stuck. We don't know where to go with this program. And so right before that photo was taken, it was the last day of the Accelerator. And I said to the group, like, you know, where are you still stuck? How do we want to use this last day? What should we work on? And Tom and then a couple other people echoed him, said, you know, we're not stuck. We know what to do. We have this support network now. We have our vision. We know how to implement it. We just need to go forward. So that was really cool to see as well. And then if you just go to the last slide that I think I have, Heather, thanks. I just wanted to share these quotes, I think hearing from the students directly through their words here. These are from the end of year surveys from the SEAS program at Bella Bella Community School as well. And so, you know, I'll leave these up there for you to read, but I'll just read out loud my favorite one, which is the one in the top right-hand corner. And it says, SEAS is important to me because all of these activities make me feel more proud to be health sick. And I just think it's amazing to hear a student say this program makes me feel more proud to be who I am and more proud of where I come from. So I think I'll leave it at that. Sorry that I've probably gone over time, but I'm happy to take any questions.
So thank you so much. I really think those quotes say it all. I want to take a moment to acknowledge that they are the voices directly from our partners, not from TNC, not from Nature United, and they really demonstrate the impact that Emerging Leaders programs have in their communities. The reconnection to culture, newfound confidence, and then the physical and emotional well-being. It's truly an amazing body of work. I know we're running a little bit low on time, so I'll hand the program over to Eric Delvin, TNC's Emerald Edge Program Director, who is monitoring our chat.
Great. Well, hello. Nice to see everyone. So Zara and Claire, I think maybe starting with Jody's question and a similar one that came in the chat, just speaking about the girls and women support in addition to the work that we support with the House It program.
So maybe I'll take that one first, Claire, and then if you have anything to jump in with, you can. But so a bunch of the programs that we work with support both women and men and youth of all genders, really. So the SEAS programs are like that. There's another program we've been working with in Taloquiet First Nation, which is not too far away from a House It, that also supports all genders. But an interesting program that we've just started working with, or group that we've just started working with, is the Acula Outdoor Education Society. And that's a group of women that came together. They're women from the Muskama Zawadena First Nation. And they're, you know, some of them are living in their territory, some of them are living outside of their territory. One person's living in Squamish, which is not too far from Vancouver. But they have just formed this society, this outdoor education society, about 1.5 years ago. And are really focused on reconnecting the members of their nations to their territories. And it's a little bit of a different situation for them because a lot of the members of those nations are not living on reserve or right in those territories like the people in Bella Bella or Klemtu or Bella Kula are. And so their programming supports women and men, or boys and girls. But they are a group of women that have come together to do this work. And so that's kind of one example that I think is really cool. And I'll just share a little bit more quickly about, they've really developed, they've kind of run with the online programming piece, and they've developed a whole digital platform for connecting youth to check-in circles weekly, and to singing and drumming, and to land-based skills like how to build a fire, how to build a shelter through videos and through chats. So I think they're doing some really great work.
That's great. And just for time, let's keep moving. There's a question around the sustainability of the program. How are we preparing nations to continue without donor fund over a long period of time?
That's a great question also, and I was just thinking about this morning. So we're doing a bunch of work with the programs that we already support around that. We've been working with the nations that we're partnered with to think about, we're calling it kind of the conversation around sustainable funding. and how to ensure that those nations have resilient and diversified funding models for these programs. And for me, COVID and the economic impacts associated with that have really highlighted even more the need to be aware of that. And so those are ongoing conversations to see kind of where funding might be available through nations who have relationships with the federal government, for example, and may be able to negotiate with the federal government of Canada to direct funding towards these programs. We're also working with schools around kind of the different opportunities that they have in their relationships with the government. And then we're also thinking about new communities we partner with and thinking about a prospect grant model and kind of looking at how we might be able to support programs to get up and running and then work with those communities and those programs to reach a place where those nations have the vision for their program and the plan for their program and the capacity to implement that, and then work together to kind of come up with a plan as to how Nature United's role can kind of transition down and the nation can take that forward on their own.
Unless you have anything to add, Claire, I think a related one here is from Charlie. If we find teensy donors in the US who are interested in funding this kind of work, how much is needed and who should we talk to about that?
That's a good question. So I don't know if Lindsay, maybe you want to take that one?
Yes, thank you so much for asking, Charlie. Please feel free to reach out to anyone on Team Canada, myself, Erin Whittle in the US. We really appreciate that support.
Great. I have a question that came in that maybe is good for Claire. It says, how is TNC's or Nature United's approach different than what other organizations are doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking that. So I think one of the things that sets us apart as a conservation organization is that, you know, I think we really have done and are doing and always growing and learning and evolving, but really putting Indigenous rights at the heart of our work around conservation. So, you know, at the beginning there, I kind of presented that slide of the why and all of those different reasons. But I feel like organizationally, we've made some really active choices to get behind this approach and to do that well. And so that requires a lot of different things. So I think that requires more time. It also requires a different way of working. It requires flexibility. I think it also requires investing both in relationships with Indigenous peoples, but also in relationships with our own organization and learning within our own organization so we can show up as a respectful partner. So yeah, I would say that the kind of effort and attention that we bring to this work and the kind of initiatives both within our team, but then within the partnerships that we, you know, how we conduct ourselves in partnership, I think set us apart from different organizations. But I also want to recognize that, you know, in the conservation space in Canada, you know, there's a lot of different organizations doing a lot of different things that are also kind of complementary to each other.
Thanks, Claire. And Cheryl, you have your hand raised for a question.
Actually, I have a comment. So I was able to visit the northern BC coast on Blue Water, and the coordinator in Vancouver helped me to connect with some people from SEAS. And one young woman I connected with was there as a summer at her home base as a summer intern, and she didn't actually live there. And she lived farther south in a town. And so for her, this was this enormous opportunity to find out who she was and to actually meet her family and all sorts of things. And so that was a piece that I had no idea might be going on, but she was a full participant in a summer SEAS program. The second comment was I met with some people who had had a SEAS program, and it had been so successful that the tribe took over funding it so that they could let the money go back to Nature United and start more of them. And I'm not quite sure where that was, but farther south in Bella Bella for sure. And the final thing is that in Bella Bella, our boat stopped. And I was kind of interested in finding out about SEAS there. And we didn't have time, but a tribal leader came on board the boat and started talking about things, and all he could talk about was seas and how wonderful it was and how their kids were going off and learning all this stuff. And afterwards I said to our captain, "Did you tell him I was interested?" And the captain looked at me sort of blankly and said, "No, I never mentioned it." And so he had just spontaneously chosen seas as the program that he wanted to tell us about, that was making such a difference in their community. So I just wanted you to know that you're getting good press, even from people who have no idea that they're being asked about it. So it was very encouraging to me and continuing my support.
Thanks, Cheryl. Yeah, that's really great to hear. And that also, I think that's an important point as well, is that SEAS has an impact not just on the youth that participate, but also on the community. And, you know, like both through things like community knowledge holders having opportunities to share that cultural and territorial knowledge with youth, and that being valued after the process of colonization, where people were told that their culture and their knowledge were not good or were not important. And so, you know, to have that chance to be able to share that and be recognized for that is huge. And in Clemtu, which is not too far from Bella Bella, this summer with their internship, they're really thinking about their SEAS internship program as a way to boost community morale and bring people back together following kind of the trauma that COVID has brought to a lot of people. And so these programs really have impact just beyond the youth. So thank you for raising that.
Okay, we might have time for one more before we need to wrap up. There's a question, what's next? Like, how is the SEAS and Emerging Leaders program changing, especially in our changing world?
That's a big question. It's a good question. I think that the programs are adapting to things that are happening, right? Like you can see that with Deanna's work on the videos during COVID. And, you know, the programs change every year depending on what the feedback has been from the surveys, and the coordinators also reflect on kind of what went well that year and what they might want to do differently next year. So I know, for example, in Clemtu with their internship program, one of their goals was to increase community involvement in the internship program. And so they last summer did a pit cook and a fishing derby, where the youth hosted both those things for the community and got people out on the water and together at the school to participate in the pit cook and people to learn about that traditional way of preparing food. And then another example that I think of is, with the Lutloke Dene First Nation and the Nahatni Dene Rangers program, with Denenene being created as an Indigenous protected area and the stewardship responsibilities that come with that, there's a need for more programming. And so Nahatni Dene Rangers are looking at expanding from a summer monitoring program, and I think they might have actually already started to build in to a winter monitoring program as well, where they can monitor caribou and other things. And I think their goal is to have a 4-season program where their stewardship kind of activities can be housed under. And so I think the programs they're kind of dynamic and constantly shifting and constantly evolving and constantly reflecting on whether their vision is changing at all and whether their plan is aligned with the way in which their vision is changing.
And Eric, if there's time, I might just add to that, to what Zara was just saying, and that, you know, in terms of how things are changing moving forward, I think we're having a lot of conversations about that internally. And I think what's surfacing is that because we're an organization that really focuses on building relationships and having strong relationships with partners, that even though being there in real life is so critical to this work, for the period when we can't do that, when it's not safe to do that, that we actually have the trust and the strong relationships with people that we're able to provide support in an ongoing way through a virtual environment. So although there's challenges around that, I think it's really neat to see what's happening right now, both with the emerging leaders work, with some of our work supporting Indigenous guardians, and our work with partners more broadly around Indigenous stewardship and Indigenous-led conservation, that we actually have the foundation to maintain and continue to provide support to a lot of our partners, despite the fact that, you know, we can't be there in person right now. So that makes me feel kind of excited, and not excited, but excited for new innovations and kind of hopeful in a way that I hadn't imagined feeling a few months ago.
Wonderful. Well, I see that we are just about out of time. So thank you all for joining us. I want to be sensitive to everyone's schedule. Thank you for asking really great questions. If we need, we will be emailing you afterwards to follow up with any questions. And we've put our contact information up on the screen now. I would encourage you to reach out anytime using our email addresses, and you can find additional contacts on our web pages. Please also consider signing up for our e-newsletter. I'm really happy to help you sign up if you haven't done so already. Follow us on social media, learn about the traditional lands that you're living on, be curious, continue to tune in and ask great questions. Thank you again to Claire and Zara. Your presentation was fantastic. And thank you again, everyone, for being here today. Have a great day.